9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, and I am joined by the host of another one of our podcasts, Norm Ornstein. How are you doing today, Norm? Happy New Year.
Well, let's hope it's a happy year for us, David, but I'll say the obligatory Happy New Year back to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm always optimistic since there is really no alternative. Right? We should just try to make the best of it. One of the ways we can do that, of course, is try to keep our eyes open and understand what's going on around us. And as we record this on a Thursday, the first full podcast we're doing in the new year, we're just a few hours away from there being a new Congress. Always a source of excitement for the American people, a little bit like pitchers and catchers returning and for spring training. There are a lot of questions surrounding this Congress. So let me start with the one that's been in the news recently. Of course, the Republicans in the House have to pick a Speaker of the House, the third most senior position in the United States government. And the incoming president, Donald Trump, says, "Oh, I like this Mike Johnson. He should be the Speaker of the House." So you would think that was all neatly said and done. So is it all neatly said and done? Is Mike Johnson automatically going to be the Speaker of the House again?
No. And what's interesting, David, is that before Donald Trump said, let's go with Mike Johnson, he ripped into Mike Johnson for having, as Trump put it, screwed up the spending deal. And then only after some of the people around him, probably my guess is Susie Wiles, who is the only one who is not certifiably a lunatic, probably said to him, and possibly some others in Congress said to him, you realize that if there is no speaker on January 3rd, there is no House. And if there is no House on January 6th, there is no certification of the electoral votes. What you wanted to have happen 4 years ago, and you don't want to have happen now, could happen again. So that's why Trump now is enthusiastic about Mike Johnson. But the problem, as we know, David, that Mike Johnson has, to start with, the practical problem. When Congress comes in, before it is actually formally able to do anything, the incoming members have to first vote to choose that speaker. And those incoming members include 219 Republicans to 215 Democrats. If everybody votes for a candidate for speaker, then Mike Johnson, who will be the nominee for the Republicans, can only afford to lose 2 of those members, or he does not have a majority. Complicating all of this, I should note, is if members vote present, which means I'm not going to vote for anybody. And of course, an incoming member can vote for any individual he or she wants. They could make David Rothkopf speaker, and wouldn't the world be a better place?
That's an excellent idea.
But if they vote present, they're not counted in the overall totals. And to be chosen as a speaker, you have to win a majority of all of those votes that are cast. So if 6 or so of the Republicans vote present and all the Democrats vote for their nominee, Hakeem Jeffries, we could have Speaker Jeffries. And wouldn't that be nice? But if Mike Johnson, on the other hand, doesn't get any members voting present, but does lose 3 Republicans and at least 1, Thomas Massey, has said he absolutely will not vote for Johnson, and several others have made it pretty clear that they don't want to vote for Mike Johnson. We don't have a speaker. And remember that at the start of the last Congress, it took 15 ballots for then leader Kevin McCarthy to finally prevail and become the speaker And all of us remember when he confronted Matt Gaetz, who thankfully will not be there for this vote at that time. And then months later, Kevin McCarthy was ousted, and it took multiple days, many, many days, for Republicans to find an alternative. They went through the next in line, Steve Scalise. They went through Tom Emmer of Minnesota, who was also in the leadership. They tried to get Jim Jordan, and that did not work before they finally settled on the lowest common denominator, which was, of course, Mike Johnson. Now, we should note here, Mike Johnson is a Christian nationalist radical who was an election denier and an abettor of insurrection in 2020 and January 2021. And the reason he's in trouble now is he's not radical enough for several members of the Republican Party in the House. But just as the last time, they have no other alternative. So we could slide past January 6th, and we might even have this going until January 20th. And that's why Donald Trump is trying to step in and convince everybody to make Mike Johnson Speaker so that he can be certified on January 6th and inaugurated on January 20th.
Well, that seems pretty complicated and kind of crazy. And do you think there are enough people to oppose Mike Johnson because he's not extreme enough? I mean, is that a thing?
It's a thing. And what it tells us is that even if Mike Johnson makes it, he will be on very shaky ground going forward. Now, one scenario would not surprise me deeply, which is that after it becomes clear at the onset that Johnson doesn't have enough votes, that Donald Trump and or his emissaries will go to the disgruntled members and say to them, look, make Mike Johnson Speaker for now. Let's get through January 20th. And then if you don't like him, we don't care if you oust him. So Johnson knows that he is on a very short leash from his own members, even if he makes it back this time. And it's because the House is fundamentally ungovernable so long as you have a Republican majority that hates the idea of relying on Democratic votes or working with Democrats, that has the tail of the most radical right-wing members wagging the dog of the others. It reminds me of when Ronald Reagan said about his White House in disarray, sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the far right hand is doing. And in this case, sometimes the far right hand doesn't know what the outer space right hand isn't doing. But that's what we have looking forward to for quite a period of time ahead.
Well, that doesn't sound like a formula for a super productive Congress to me, Norm.
Yeah. I think, frankly, that for Donald Trump, for his billionaire buddies who got him in office and who are close to him, for his billionaire family members, they really only want the Congress to do one thing, and that is to continue the ginormous tax cuts that they implemented when Trump was president the first time around, that expire next year, and to add to it even more tax cuts for the super wealthy and corporations. And other than that, as long as they don't shut down the government and blow up the full faith and credit of the United States, Trump will do whatever he wants to do via executive action.
To the extent that he can and to the extent that the courts allow it. But before we get to that, I agree. It seems to me that, the Congress wasn't that productive the last time around for Trump, and it's not likely to be productive this time. If anything, it's the majority is, as you say, very fragile. And it looks to me like this. Trump is talking up these tariffs. But I've noticed that he's talking up these tariffs in a very interesting way. Essentially, what he wants to do is impose tariffs as an alternative source of revenue to the United States. So he can say, hey, look, we don't need these high taxes. In the past, before we even had an income tax, we made our money with tariffs. We're going to make our money with tariffs again. So let's cut the taxes for the rich even more. And, after a couple of months of trying this, of course, it'll be discovered that it doesn't work. But that doesn't matter because it will have passed. Now, that's a very cynical analysis, and I know that you are not a cynical man. You're a very hopeful person who looks at everything with the rosy view. And so what do you think of that?
So I used to be a Pollyanna. Now I am a realist. We know that Trump has put out on Truth Social a chart suggesting that the country was in wonderful shape before we had an income tax, when we had this huge revenue coming in from the tariffs. Of course, that was when the country was teeny and before the Industrial Revolution, before the modern era. But what's also true is that around those times, we also had depressions in 1896, in 1929, that his ideas don't really play out in the real world. The problem is, in a larger sense, that if these tax cuts that he did before get extended, they will probably result in $5 trillion of additions to our national debt. So the plan, as you say, is to make up the revenue with tariffs, but also by cutting deeply into Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and very possibly farm subsidies. And that is not a formula for political success.
Well, it's not a formula for passage in a Congress where you have 2 votes to spare, because every single one of those things is going to screw 2+ Republicans, right?
It will. Doesn't mean they won't vote for it. And what we're now hearing is, you can do the tax cuts. We've seen multiple times from the George W. Bush era on, through the process known as reconciliation, part of the budget process. And now they weren't supposed to be used this way because reconciliation is supposed to cut deficits, not add to them, which tax cuts do. So they've used this sort of phony formula that they expire after 10 years and then all this revenue comes in. But you can also use them to cut programs. Now, in theory, you can't use them to cut Social Security or Medicare. They're verboten. But we're already hearing talk of trying to use another version of the so-called nuclear option, which is to have a simple majority of the Senate basically say, we don't care what the law says, we can do cuts in entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, through this process. And they may get enough Republicans to go along at the outset before there would be almost certainly a very substantial public backlash when they realize what's happened.
Yeah, it seems to me that the politics of this doesn't work, and the closer you get to 2026, it's going to bite for a lot of these people who are going to be up for reelection. Having said that, there'll be a lot of other things on the agenda for this Congress. Trump's going to come in and he's going to want to put in a lot of judges and so forth through the Senate. Is the Senate going to be a little more functional for him?
The Senate will probably do what he wants when it comes to judges. And with a couple of exceptions, will probably do what he wants when it comes to cabinet members and executive appointees.
Go out on a limb. Who are the exceptions?
I think there is a very real chance that Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, maybe Pete Hegseth, probably not RFK Jr., will fall by the wayside, but the others will go through, and he'll pick many, if they don't go through, for positions in the White House or ones that don't require a confirmation. And since there's not going to be a lot of legislating, they will, absorb all of the delays that Democrats can put in place and become a judicial confirmation machine. But I don't see much more than that. And one of the things that works for Republicans, at least right now, is that even though there are significantly more Republicans up for election in the Senate in 2026, all of this, of course, assuming we still have elections, most of those seats are in very red states and are pretty safe. So they are not starting out deeply worried about losing their majority. The House is a different matter. But having said that, and circling back to where we were before, if they do a lot of things that are politically unpopular, if the tariffs and some of the other policies result in significant inflation, if they play around with the debt ceiling and we end up with a combination of recession and inflation, what used to be called stagflation, if we see that they're able to succeed, for example, in block granting Medicaid and cutting it by 25 or 30%, and some of that impact is felt on the single largest program within Medicaid, which is nursing homes, you're going to see a lot of middle-class families upset. Some of those red state senators may find more trouble than they ever anticipated. And, I think 6 months from now, we'll have to step back, or 8 months from now, and assess where things are. Because the fact is, the vast majority of voters for Trump didn't vote for some of those policies that are going forward. They didn't vote to have more inflation. They didn't vote with the potential of detaining and deporting millions of immigrants, the economic turmoil that will bring. For example, imagine if in Nebraska the entire meat industry collapses because all of the people working in the meat plants have left, have been deported. We may see a backlash. But we're not there yet, and we don't know. And Trump's luck has been, just as it was in 2017 when he came in, inheriting a terrific Obama economy. Trump comes in inheriting a remarkably strong Biden economy. And the question is, how long does it take for him to really screw that up?
Well, you are painting a very cheerful picture here, Norm. Of course, one question is how much of it prerogative does the Congress want to lose to a president who thinks he can do everything himself by executive order? Clearly, there is a view within the Republican Party, including some in the courts, that the unitary president has all the authority he needs to do anything he wants. Do you think there are lines that he might attempt to cross that will run afoul of his own party?
I'm hopeful that we will see a resurgence of institutional pride among Republicans in Congress. I'm hopeful that they will begin to see that there are electoral consequences for them if he goes down this path. But I'm also skeptical of that, and for a couple of reasons. One is most Republicans in Congress have no sense of institutional pride. They will forego it all for their dear leader. A second is that they're scared. They're intimidated. And remember, we may have Trump if he follows through and pardons what he calls the January 6th hostages, including the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. He may have his own private militia that will intimidate Republicans in Congress. If you don't go along, you've got troubles ahead. Nice house you've got there. Hate to see anything happen to it. Nice family there. We may see some of that. And if he doesn't have that, he will go on Truth Social and get the constituents of these Republicans up in arms about him. So, whether they will really stand up remains to be seen. And one of my fears, frankly, also is that even though we have a Supreme Court, I must tell you, I gagged watching the year-end message of Chief Justice John Roberts railing against the unfair attacks on the Roberts Court, when those attacks are more than fair. His is the worst court in the history of the country. But if they stand up to him at all after this immunity ruling and say, you can't do that by executive action, it's unconstitutional and or illegal, I can easily imagine Donald Trump saying, oh yeah, how are you going to stop me? And I can imagine a Congress unwilling to do what would be necessary to stop him. So, we have warning signals ahead that, we might move into an extended period where the normal checks and balances, which have not been there significantly in the past, could be shredded even further.
Well, there's a couple other things that I find very chilling from recent events, and I'd like to talk about them. But I'm going to do that in a minute after we take our break. This is the point in the podcast where we say to everybody who is not a paying subscriber that we've enjoyed having you with us, and that we hope as you go into 2025 and see the kind of expertise and insight you need, that you'll find it worth your while to join and become a DSR Network member. You get the benefit of a lot of free content, the bonus content with each of our shows, and ad-free content and so forth. So this is the moment to consider that. But if you're not a paying member, this is also the moment we say goodbye. If you are a paying member, stand by. Okay, so one of the things that also happened over the past couple of weeks, which is almost unbelievable to me, is that somehow Elon Musk became more odious than he was before. And in the past couple of days, he's like embraced a new alt-right identity on X and put Pepe the Frog as his avatar on X, and he has told people, who don't agree with him on issues like immigration that, they should get fucked in the face, and it's colorful, but I don't think he or anybody is fully grasping what it means when the person who's doing these things, and he wrote an endorsement of the neo-Nazi far-right party in Germany in this period as well, is the senior most advisor to the President of the United States. Nobody, as of right now, seems to have a position of influence like Elon. Elon is living at Mar-a-Lago. He's got a little cottage. He's paying $2,000 a night just to be near Trump. He was at Trump's table at Christmas. He is not, he thinks he could be the richest man in the world and a big shot in the government. But of course, you can't really do both those things. And I'm just wondering how you think, this is all going to play out.
So one other thing that we ought to note here is that just like Trump has his alter ego, John Barron, who he used to call journalists to tout his accomplishments, Musk now has created his own, Adrian Titman, who he had do a tweet saying, what a remarkable father Elon Musk is.
Something none of his kids would say, by the way.
No, this is really bizarre. What I find so interesting about this is two things. One that you mentioned, which is a caveat of sorts, which is there's a civil war going on in the Trump orbit. And that's a war between the tech bros. It's not just Musk. It's Peter Thiel and David Sachs and the others who have supported him, given him money, who now want to make sure that the immigration things that Trump promised, including the mass deportation of people and really stopping immigration in its tracks, does not happen, while the Steve Bannons of the world and the people who have been close to Trump in the past are going after these tech bros. And, the more that they're fighting internally, the better it is for the country. But the second part of this is it's pretty clear that Trump is no longer as enamored of Elon Musk as he was. And we know that there was a kind of a deal here. At least Trump saw it as a deal, probably a tacit one. Elon, you spend $270 million to get me elected, and I will do this for you. I will put you and Vivek Ramaswamy in a non-governmental sinecure where you have no power and you can flit around out there, and I will marginalize you. And it's not working that way. And Musk is now the alpha male, and Trump will not abide by another alpha male around him. But how do you jettison the richest man in the history of the world, who will then turn on you while having multiple social media platforms and other ways of making your life very difficult? So this reminds me a little bit of that movie where Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier escaped from prison. A white man who was a racist and a black man tethered together with an iron handcuff, having to work together while despising each other as they meandered along on the outside to avoid the law. And in this case, I don't know how long Trump is going to be willing to have Elon Musk in that post. The one thing that surprises me, David, is Musk is in a $2,000 a day cottage at Mar-a-Lago. I just cannot believe that Trump is not charging him $100,000 a day to go into his pocket for that proximity. But everybody has their weaknesses, I guess.
But one of the things that doesn't get discussed a lot in, sort of news analysis, not that anybody's paying attention to news analysis anymore if you read the cable TV ratings, but there are lots of podcasts that have higher ratings than cable news these days. But one of the things that doesn't get discussed, and I think has got to be consequential here, is Trump's a lame duck. He doesn't ever have to run for election again. And he doesn't care about anybody other than himself. Now, this could either be seen as very liberating for him, or it could make the rest of the Republican Party say, oh, but we're going to have to deal with Musk for a long time. Trump is less consequential in the long term than the guys who are writing the big checks for our party are going to be, like Musk and Thiel and Sachs and Andreessen and those guys. And so they may push the party more to the, in the tech bro direction, which, while it has a lot of odious qualities, is slightly less odious, perhaps, than the MAGA direction in some qualities, like immigration, for example.
Well, here's the worst case scenario for Trump. And all of this assumes that he is going to allow elections to go forward. The worst case scenario is that within the next year, we have an economy in serious trouble. We have higher inflation. We have a lot of products that Americans rely on no longer available or priced out of their range. That includes, by the way, a number of key pharmaceuticals that are coming from European countries that would also be subject to those tariffs. And there's a big backlash, and that backlash extends to the midterm elections. And if what we see in the midterms in 2026 is anything even remotely close to what we saw that hit Barack Obama and Democrats in both midterms, 2010 and 2014, massive Republican gains. And if we see massive Democratic gains, or at least significant ones, if they recapture House and Senate, he's got a world of trouble. And if we think going forward that we are going to have a presidential election in 2028, and he is not running and not able to run, and we do have that lame duck status, and we have a Republican Party where you're going to have a ton of candidates, many of them to the crazy right direction beyond where Donald Trump has ever been. maybe with Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or one of these others, either running himself or putting large sums of money into, whether it's J.D. Vance or somebody else. They're going to, not face what they believe they have going forward. But I have to tell you, David, it's hard for me to imagine that they're just going to stand by and let the process work through its formal legal mechanisms. We have seen in the past that they will do anything, no matter how illegal, unconstitutional, or immoral, to gain power and to hold power. And we all have to be aware that we may face a very different set of challenges going forward.
Yes, we definitely do, and we definitely have to monitor these things. And Norm and I have talked off microphone about this, and really hope that the future of Words Matter, which Norm hosts here, will be a look at what's going on in the Congress in depth on a regular weekly basis, because I think we need to track these things very closely. I think there are going to be other things, by the way, just as an aside regarding what you're talking about. Almost immediately, Trump will start cooking the numbers. So, inflation will go up, but it won't be reported as going up. And we're going to see something different from what we've ever seen in that regard, which is the government actively lying to people about what their economic conditions are. But again, these are the kind of things that we will cover. I can't say you've filled me with New Year's optimism here, Norm. But I can say that you have filled us with the kind of wisdom and insight that we were looking for. So I am grateful for that, and I'm going to hope for the best and look forward to keep talking to you about it. And I look forward to all of you joining us here each and every week at the DSR Network for our regular podcasts and for Words Matter and for our daily brief and for the TNR podcast that we do, the Daily Blast. And hopefully between all of these things, we'll be able to help each other through this challenging time. For now, thank you, Norm. Thank you, everybody. And bye-bye.